Hey everybody, it's Tim from Tadabase here, and this is Build It with Tim. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about additional field settings that are available to you inside of the page builder, specifically inside the form component and the table component. Now, the idea for this video actually was inspired by me, who's supposed to be your resident Tadabase expert, except I got absolutely humbled last week when I completely forgot that a specific feature existed. So I've picked a couple of fields that we're going to talk about today to show you those additional settings inside the form component and the table component. So let's get into it and check them out. Getting right into it, the fields that we've added to our sample data table here are date field, attachments field, address field, slider field, and a connection field. Inside the page builder, I've set up a pretty simple page here with a table component on the left-hand side to display the records from that table and a form component on the right-hand side to input new records to that data table. When we check out what this page looks like in our published application, everything here looks pretty standard. We have our date fields, address fields, slider fields, and our connection field, and same with the form. Filling out the form is going to be exactly how you expect, where you can type in your address and we'll use Google Maps to find and validate your actual address. We can select our connected company through a drop-down, and we have a date picker that allows us to choose a date for the date field. The progress slider simply slides back and forth so that we can select a value. And the attachments field, of course, allows us to upload images through this drag and drop interface. Now, the first field that I want to talk about is the date field, because this is the one that got me just last week. A lot of times when we're talking about form components and date fields, there's typically some sort of validation that's happening inside the form to make sure that a date is selected that meets some sort of condition or criteria. I think I've done a couple videos now with validation rules and how to set those up. But when you're talking about date fields, there's actually a much simpler way to restrict what the user can and cannot select. I've clicked on my form component to open the component configuration window. And now that I'm inside of this screen, I can simply click any one of the fields on my form to open up additional settings for that field. By clicking on the date input field options, we're going to be met with a bunch of different options that we can choose to configure our date field. As far as restricting what can and cannot be selected through the date picker, this option at the top will allow us to restrict dates, whether they are in the past, in the future, by day range or date range, as a super simple way to say, hey, we only want dates to be selected as long as they are in the future. If we want to do that, we would simply choose restrict dates past date. This makes it so that you cannot choose anything in the past. Next, we have the ability to toggle on the week numbers or toggle them off. We can choose the day of the week that we typically start on. And in addition to toggling when you can actually select dates in the past or the future or in a range, you can also set what days are actually allowed to be selected. So in this example, I only want my users to select future dates, and I don't want them to select weekends. Saving this form now and checking out what that looks like inside of our published application, we have an entirely different date picker. We can no longer select anything in the past. And as far as future dates are concerned, we can't do Sundays, we can't do Saturdays, we can only do weekdays. Moving on to connection fields. By default, connection fields look like this. They are a simple dropdown that displays a field value from your connected table. In this case, the company name. However, if I want to display more information about that company, I can change how that field is displayed inside my form. So once again, we'll click on our form component and then click on our connection field and navigate to the design tab. Here I can change the connection field style from a dropdown to something like a list or a table view. Enabling one of these additional options will give us the ability to add additional fields from that connected table, and we'll display them through that dropdown. Now, when I go back to this connection field, it looks entirely different and it gives me way more information about that particular connection. Now, for the address field, we can simply type in our address and we'll get some Google Maps results that we can select to validate that particular address. In addition to that, however, inside the address field, there's an option to add a button to get the current location. Toggling on this option and refreshing our page will add a new button to our page that allows us to click it and get our current location. The last one we're going to talk about for the form component is the attachments field. Now, I have an entire video, a feature spotlight video for this particular field and how to do image sizing and compression, but that's only one kind of part that we're going to be talking about today. Going back to the form component and opening up our attachments field gives us way more options than just resizing by width, height, and compressing the quality of the image. We also have the ability to restrict by maximum file size, maximum number of files, accepted file types, what type of capture method opens up inside of a mobile device by default. So whether that's going to be the image or the video recorder or just a microphone. We can also change the default text that appears inside the drop zone area where we're dragging and dropping our files. And then, as I mentioned, we have the ability to resize the width, the height, or both, and compress the quality, which is incredibly handy when you're trying to make sure that users are not uploading photos that are massively oversized. Once we've configured our form component and we've added records into our application, now it's time to display them inside of something like a table component. Again, by default, this is what a table component could look like for you. And all of our values that we've entered through the form are displayed pretty regularly here. A date field looks like a date field. The address field is clickable to open in Google Maps. The progress slider is a number value. That's all fine and good. However, we're going to take this additional settings thing from the form component, and it can also be applied inside of a table component. Using the same method we did for the form component, all we have to do is click on our table component and then click on the field that we want to edit. Date fields specifically have the ability to change not only how the date itself is formatted, but we can also change how the date is outputted. So rather than just displaying it as a regular date value, we can change it to a stopwatch or to an age value. To demonstrate both, I'm going to add the field again here to the table, configure one for stopwatch and one for age. I can also toggle on whether or not I want to include months or days because the age format here is going to output as kind of a natural language. Refreshing our published application, you can now see what that looks like and how it's changed. Rather than displaying a typical date, we now get a real-time running clock of how much time has passed, as well as a natural language age that includes years, months, and days. The address field has some additional settings as well, nothing quite as fancy as the date field, but if you don't want the address field to link to Google Maps, under the Format tab, we can toggle that off. By default, our progress slider is going to show a simple number value. So when we select something through our slider, whether it's 50% or 75%, whatever it is, it's just going to display as a regular number. We can change the output from a number to a progress bar, and then we have the additional ability to modify what that bar looks like. Now, by default, that progress bar is going to look like this, where we can just have a solid color behind our value, and the bar is going to be representative of that particular value. But we can make it a little bit more fancy. If we go back to our settings here, we can change it from a solid bar to a stripe. And then we can add additional color rules by defining what color the bar should be and the conditions it needs to meet in order to be that color. And now that we go back to our published application, you can see that our progress bars look way cooler. All right, and that just about wraps up this week's episode of Build It with Tim. I hope you found these quick tips useful. Hopefully, they were new information for you, and they're going to allow you to add much more kind of personal and practical touches to your application, whether that's through how things are displayed inside of a table component or how you're letting users interact with data and submit data through your form component. All of these options that we discussed here are super quick and easy to set up, so I highly recommend checking them out. Thanks so much for watching this week's episode of Build It with Tim. We'll see you next time. Take care.